Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson. Tonight we're going to be talking to a paranormal investigator called Dylan Jones. Dylan has been investigating the paranormal for about 20 years. Oh, 20 years, sorry, what am I saying? He's been doing it for 30 years. He's an ex-police officer who's currently doing his PhD into the modern paranormal teams and the media. Now, it's not called that. I'm going to ask Dylan in a sec what it's called, but it's obviously very interesting, the whole idea of doing a PhD research into the way the media has affected the paranormal, and what you see every day now on the television. The difference is what would be happening today as opposed to, say, even 20, 30 years ago, before we saw the kind of entertainment slash paranormal investigations that you see in these TV shows. How has it affected it? And is it good? Is it bad? We're going to find out. We're going to talk to Dylan, and he's going to fill us in on that. So, as I say, Dylan Jones on the Spooky Owls tonight. Good evening, Dylan. How are you?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Now, I was just saying in the introduction, now I didn't know the name of your PhD research. I just called it Modern Paranormal Teams and the Media, but I believe it has a different name. So, what are you researching?
Well, I've got a really snappy title for it. Hopefully, you won't fall asleep in the middle of it. But it's the media representation of paranormal phenomena and research, and its influences on the professional practices of modern ghost hunting groups. So, basically, what I'm looking at is how the media portray ghosts, how they portray people who investigate it, and whether or not it's affecting the behavior of people who go ghost hunting.
Okay.
So, I'm looking
So,
at
sorry, keep going.
So I'm looking at different forms of media. I'm looking at visual media, looking at print, looking at audio, looking at your social media, and seeing whether or not any of those actually affect the behavior of people who are going out week in, week out, doing some ghost hunting.
Okay. So, in a sentence or two, what have you discovered?
Well, actually, I'm right in the middle of it at the moment. So I'm doing my PhD at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. I'm doing it part-time over 6 years because of having full-time employment. So trying to balance the two is a bit of a balance, is a juggling act. So I'm literally just past the 3-year stage. So the first 2 years was looking at the literature from an anthropological perspective, media, from parapsychology, putting all those things together, setting out the methodology. So right at the moment, I'm in the middle of the data gathering stage, which means that I'm out there at the moment looking at and spending time with the groups who are going out ghost hunting. So at the moment, I'm actually getting the data in. So whereas I'm picking up things, I don't want to say just yet what I'm picking up, because if you've got anybody who's watching this that I'm going to be spending time with, I don't want to be putting things into their mind about what I'm going to be looking at or finding or them telling me. What I can say is that I'm comparing the groups in the UK and the USA. So I've been spending time with a lot of groups on the east coast of the States, in Massachusetts, North Carolina, and in Georgia, and looking at what they're doing. And I'm also now doing the same in the UK. And I will be going back to America to do the same again and continue with it in the UK. So really going back and forth between the two sides and seeing whether there's any difference between the two. And the reason I'm comparing the two is that the bulk of the paranormal programming does seem to originate from the States. Obviously, we know that Most Haunted was one of the forerunners in the UK, but primarily most of the programs, like to be Ghost Adventures, your Ghost Hunters, Ghost Nation, Paranormal State, all those originated stateside. And we're seeing whether or not there's any what we call cross-pollination of media as well. Other people have said you could have looked at things like, what are you looking at, like what's going on in India or Bangladesh? It's like, well, no, that's a separate, somebody else can do that one. I look primarily concentrating on the Western culture.
Okay. I know you don't want to obviously say what you're looking for and maybe what you found because you don't want to preempt things, but just off the top of my head, and this is just from watching TV shows and that, I'm assuming that there's the whole west coast of America is full of demons and there's nothing in England.
Um,
Demons. Everything's a demon in America.
I think there's a certain person that you can sort of pretty much say has been largely responsible for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Certainly Mr. Bagans. Um, and, there is an element of that in the States, that I think that you've got to look at the sort of religious backgrounds, the religious culture in the States being how it was shaped and the way it is. But there are sort of undertones of it in the UK, where it's in the UK, there are some who are thinking, it's going to be a demonic or malicious or malevolent entity that's actually involved in the haunting. So, there is some, definite cross
Is
pollination.
that because they've been watching the American TV shows?
Now that is the very important question that I'm trying to find out.
Yeah, because I imagine, and I don't know how the old spirituals churches here in Britain might have acted, and how the effect there is, but they. I just don't remember reading my old, Peter Underwood slash, Peter Haining, all those type of ghost books. There just didn't seem to be, it's a demon. It was always, maybe a poltergeist might have been some kind of malicious entity, but it was never we never pointed it to be something of Satan. Certainly not within since the 1600s. So America seems to be everything now is like the Warrens. Everything is a demon, hell, beast, whatever. Which is nothing that we hear here in Britain.
No, and I think you've picked up on something that's really important there. And I think that, I'll have to come back to you. And if you're willing to be interviewed, I would love to get your view on it. Seriously, as somebody who has been interested in investigating for countless years, what influenced you? And I think listening to what you were saying about Peter Underwood and the other authors, that's exactly how I grew up. I want, media was one of the things that got me involved in it in the first place. So I wanted to read all the books. So I was reading Peter Underwood, Andrew Mackenzie, Lloyd Auerbach, as early as I can remember, from the age of about 9 or 10. But it's interesting to find. It'll be interesting to find out whether the modern investigators are reading books. And I've been poring over a lot of the media texts. And when I'm referring to text, I don't mean a book. I mean, video, audio, the other texts. And it's very interesting when you read a lot of the ghost hunting books that are out there. You've got Peter Underwood's, you've got Zach Bagans' book, and the different approaches that they take. And there is a big difference in those two examples. I mean, Peter Underwood's book, written in the 80s, it was very informative. I don't really recall mentioning much about. I don't think he mentions demons in there at all.
Yeah.
And yet, Zach Bagans' book, there's a demon practically every other page. So
And
yes,
that's
it
I
has
was going to say that's
changed.
a very religious thing, isn't it? Because you don't really tend to see in the books of the 70s and 80s here, by and large, being too religious.
Hmm.
But in the American type stuff, it very much is.
Yeah, and you mentioned quite rightly the Warrens and the
Yep.
influence that they've exerted over the culture. And I mean, they were a couple that were prevalent in American paranormal culture from going back into the 70s. Their involvement in things like the Amityville Horror and so on. And when I speak to ghost hunters in America, they almost revere the Warrens. I mean, there are quite a few that are like, whoa, we're not into them at all. But you can definitely pick up on the influence that they've had. And even when we look at 28 Days Haunted, the 6-episode series on Netflix, that's based around one of their theories. Call it that if you can, and how that has influenced people. And people are starting to, they're watching it in the UK, they're discussing it. I've been out with some ghost hunting groups in the UK, and they brought up that particular program and what they thought of it. And so yeah, there is a certain amount of influence, but whether or not it's actually affecting the way that they investigate, that's what I'm trying
Yeah.
to find out.
I suppose also the word you've just used there is investigate.
Mm.
And I always I always question when people say they're going out to investigate what that actually means. So if we watch a TV show where it's entertainment and they do it in like we've got 24 hours to investigate this place, that's just absurd, isn't it? It's not. It's like we're going to go around, wander around. We're going to use some cameras, and we're going to hopefully find some dust particles that we could, run away from and have a bit of a show. So I think that's why this is, that people think that that's an investigation, as opposed to when you look at something like, I'll use Borley because that's the biggest one that everyone does. That's something that goes on for years. And that might have been some showboating. There's questions about how much of that was real and what it was. But when people go and they look at a place, I was talking with the Jamaica Inn paranormal team, which was the in-house team at the Jamaica Inn in Cornwall. Now they've been doing it for 8 years. That's an investigation because you can actually take the stuff and put it together. But running a 3-day investigation where you try to cut that down to an hour, or 55 minutes or whatever it might be, is not an investigation. And that's why I think maybe people now, has that, me just chucking out all those ideas, has that affected the way people think that an investigation is now a paranormal investigation?
Yeah, I mean, it's that is an interesting question that is being asked. Is what do you define an investigation as? I always refer back to in my previous life when I was a police officer. I did that for nearly 18 years, and an investigation in the legal sense. You can come out with some a list of what that means. It means going to a particular scene. It means speaking to a witness, being trained to speak to a witness, to ask the right questions in the right manner, in the right order, recording what the witness says in an appropriate format, so everything's written down, or under certain circumstances, video or taped interviews. You have cognitive interviewing process. And then you're looking for the other evidence that are involved. Do you bring scenes of crime in? And you can always transfer that methodology onto a paranormal investigation, but you would need people with a specific skill set in which to be able to do it. People who have got specific training, and anybody who's been to the ASAP conferences, and we know that the people involved, you've got the likes of Steve Parsons who would come in, he can offer his expertise. You'd have perhaps Chris French coming in, offering his, and you have these people with all these great skills brought in. And what you tend to find at the moment when it comes to the paranormal investigation teams is that they're made up of some lovely people. I've had some wonderful times with when I'm spending time with them. Very, very gracious, accommodating people, full of a real vigor for what they're doing. They're passionate about what they're doing, and they're all from many walks of life, many different jobs and backgrounds. We're talking, teachers up to head teacher kind of level. We're talking police officers. We're talking people from all different walks of life. But the systems that they're using, that's also very interesting, is what are they doing when they're investigating? And you will find that some of the academics will view it as nothing more than legend tripping. They're literally turning up at a location, they're having it as a form of entertainment. They think they're doing research, or what they deem to be research, but when it's held up to scrutiny, it doesn't stand up. And it's one of the things I'm looking to do with the research towards the end is seeing if we can bridge the gap between academia and on the ground investigations. Because there's a lot of talk about how do we raise the standard of it, because it's something that is worthy of study. So if you're going to study it, how can we do it in the best possible way? Because one of the things I do find, and I think everybody finds this, is people go out investigating, but how many of them are actually writing things down? How many of them are pulling the data together and presenting it in a format which is accessible down the line to somebody else who comes along? And I don't think there's many.
That's right. And I think scribbling down some notes about hearing a noise is probably not enough, is it? You want to do
No.
it the way. I remember when I first went with a ghost club and how you would you'd have the people sitting in different parts of the building, and that if you got up and walked across the thing, you'd have to write it down just in case they heard a creak. And so therefore, I heard a creak at 12:32. They could check. Well, David was downstairs and he walked across the room. That would discount that. So I think there's ways of doing it, but there's a lot of them. I think if that was the case, if people were doing it right, some of these haunted houses that charge money for investigations every week should have something, so thick it should be undeniable whether there's a haunting there, because it should have, eyewitness testimony for thousands of people.
Exactly. Yeah, there are things that could be done, but there are reasons why they're not. And I'm trying to find out what those reasons are. Again, it comes down to influence, but I don't think the influence possibly will be as clear cut as what people think.
You said you've been doing what you've said. You've been doing this for about 30 years. So that's well before the internet. That's well before paranormal shows. You might be around about the time of Ghost Watch, but that doesn't really count, just because that was sort of not really an investigation. That was a sort of a comic TV show. But what are you doing today that you weren't doing 30 years ago?
Good question. I mean, 30 years ago, if I go back to what happened then, to how I got into this, that might be able to frame it nicely. That when I was 7, my uncle passed away. We were very, very close. And a few months later, I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I saw him standing in my bedroom doorway and then fading away, and then calling for my mum to say, "Mum, can you come in?" Now, yes, that could have been a hypnopompic experience where you're waking from a dreamlike state, but that was the one thing that got me, that sort of put the seed in my mind. The next thing was 1984. There was this advert on television for this film, and when I was out in the car with Mum and Dad, I'd see this huge poster at the bus stop with a red circle with a line through it and a ghost in the middle, and that's all it had. And then I found out it was called Ghostbusters, and then I pestered my mum to take me to the cinema to go and see it, and that was it. I was hooked. So I was asking people, have you seen a ghost? I'd start with my mum, and she told me an experience that she had had. So that was it. I wanted to find out more. So what did I do? How could I find out more? Books, because that's what we had. I vaguely remember Arthur C. Clarke, the TV show, when that was on. But back then I was reading a lot, and I remember getting the Usborne Book of Ghosts. And then when I was 13, on my 13th birthday, I remember getting The Ghost Hunter's Guide by Peter Underwood. And what I did was I went and bought, with my pocket money, a nice toolbox, and I put in all the things that I could that Peter Underwood had said you should take with you. And I'd take myself off to Caldecott Castle on the bus.
Which one was that? Sorry, repeat that. What was the name of the castle?
Caldecott Castle.
Okay, yep.
Which is just not far from the Severn Bridge. And I would go up on the bus, and they were great. They'd let me spend the afternoon or the day there. No cost at all. Wonderful. So that's what I was doing back then, 30 years ago. Making little notes, but going along thinking I was doing the right thing, setting the tape recorder up and speaking to people and doing it that way. A police career later, and now doing the PhD, what it is now, it's a lot more about the methodology and writing things down and looking at quality rather than quantity. I think and I'm not criticizing any of the groups at all. It's just a personal observation, is that they seem to go on quantity of investigations rather than quality. It's, so-and-so, this investigator on TV, he's done 1,000 investigations. You can go 1,000 investigations and you can be absolutely terrible at what you do, but doesn't make you competent at what you do. So now it's a question of, if I just have one, that's it. And if I could spend years doing it, that would be ideal. But at the moment, the actual time investigating personally has taken a backseat because of the PhD. You just can't afford to juggle the two. But in answer to what I'm doing differently, I think it's definitely focusing on what you can achieve, the minute things, rather than trying to get as much as you can with putting bits of equipment out here, there, and everywhere, and trying to do it all, because you can't.
I think it's interesting. I would like to go to all these places. I don't necessarily want to do investigations in any of them. I just like to think that I've been to a couple. I went at the weekend. I stayed at a hotel in Bournemouth, which has got its own ghost. It even had a sign there. The Celebrity Hotel used to be owned by Tony Hancock's parents, and I had no desire to investigate. I just think it's cool. So I'm very much of the list of like I want to go to all the famous places, all the different security inns and all those type of places. I don't necessarily want to do an investigation there because going there for 7 hours and it might be fun and it's a bit you're not discovering anything. I don't think. I don't know, but I'd rather just go to a pub that's supposedly haunted, enjoy it, go around, look at all the weirdy things I've got on the walls, have beers, enjoy myself, and that's how I collect my ghost experiences, which is different to the. And I think there's value in that because that is like the Peter Underwood almanacs and all those type of things, or the gazetteers, because they are lists of places that supposedly have hauntings, but are cool anyway. And so I could bring my wife, who couldn't care less, but she enjoys the historic buildings and castles and stuff like that. And I just wonder at times whether people might be as interested in doing that kind of way of doing things, as opposed to not saying pretending to investigate, but kind of in pretending to investigate. Because when you go on some of these paid tours, here, have this latest toy that's been promoted by a television show. Tell me the science behind this. Why is that? And I mean, you mentioned Steve Parsons before, and he talks a lot about this and all these different things. And I don't understand it. You've got and James Tashi and Anne and all those people that you work with. They could tell the reasons why or why not, but at the end of the day we really don't know what level ghosts are playing at, or spirits, so how can we measure it? So I just it's a very difficult thing, and I think if you're not prepared to at least do what you said you're doing, like writing it all down, comparing it to other times in different situations, all you're doing is that you're just running around doing Scooby Doo, who actually never used any instruments. But that's another thing altogether. That Scooby Doo never, the mystery gang and all that never did any used any of those kind of machines.
I mean, the whole equipment thing absolutely fascinates me. And when I did the ASAP conference in September, my presentation was, looking at the modern paranormal groups just playing Ghostbusters, um, and looking at the fact that they dress. They all have a uniform. They have their hoodies. They have their
Oh, that's not
logos
mine.
on
Oh,
it.
yeah, right, yeah,
You'll do it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but they have their own sort of brand. They have their own the appeals to science, the appeals to the equipment. They're creating their own equipment. Just like the EMF meter is the Ghostbusters PKE meter. They're trying all sorts of wonderful, inventive ideas to try and the EMF pumps and K2 tripwires and all these wonderful little toys that they've got. And, even some of the groups in America, and it's starting to happen here, they're getting their own vehicles fully liveried up. There's ones in the States who've got ambulances, not a Cadillac, but they've got a proper converted ambulance, and it's all got the logos on the side. They've invested huge amounts of money in this, and they're funding and asking people to call them out when they've got things going on in their home or office. So they're like an emergency response team, just like the Ghostbusters.
Are they filming these? Have they got their video cameras out or their phones out filming every second of it though?
Yeah, but that's the next thing. They're filming it. It's about
Well, that's
let's
why
get.
they're filming. That's why they've got the thing, because they're looking for their next TV show or what they want to be famous. And the amount of people that I talk to over the time, investigators, and they're all, most of them, I'd say 90% of them are all very sincere, so I don't have a problem. But every now and then you find one and you're thinking, you're doing this because you're going on that you think this is your way of being the next Zach Baggins or of Annette Fielding or these type of people, Jason Hawes or these type of people. They're doing it, and that's why they're investing in a nice flashy looking car with their own logos and stuff like that because it's about their next TV show. Well, not their next TV show, it's their big break.
Yeah. Yeah, the 15 minutes of fame thing, isn't it? I mean, I would rather just carry on doing what I'm doing and get my results and be respected by my peers rather than playing to, how many likes I can get on Facebook, how many followers I can get, how many stars I can collect in my life. It's not about that. I mean, a lot of these people, when I look at the conventions, I've been to a few of them as part of the research, and these people are revered, but they're revered because they're on TV. They're not revered because they've actually contributed anything to the wider field of study. I was at an event in Bosworth last March. I had a great festival of the unexplained. Lots of lovely people. Met some lovely people there. And they had the Tennessee Wraith Chasers as the main guests. And they had a Q&A session on the Sunday, and I was sat there with a notepad taking notes. And they come out with an absolute nugget for my research. Because Chris Smith, one of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, says, well, we were doing one of the episodes and the producers wanted something that was Ghostbusters. And it was like, oh, it was like a meerkat. Oh, what's he said? And he said they wanted a trap. They wanted us to build a trap because it was like Ghostbusters. And it was like, so in my mind, I'm thinking, you have become a slave. You've sold your soul to the production company and they're making you do all this stuff. Now, do you want to be serious researchers or do you just want the paycheck? And I think most people, that's what they're after, is the paycheck.
It is difficult, and I think that's the same with when you have accusations of mediums, psychics that are making stuff up, because I'm sure there's I've always said there's three types of them. There's completely utterly sincere, slightly deluded, or making it up. I don't think there's but they have to perform, and they've got to perform for each episode. Imagine if Derek Acora said, "No, nothing in this place." No, that's it just wouldn't be a TV show, would it? So how do you provide television? Because at the end of the day, it is like paint drying at a paranormal investigation. Because the idea is you're going in there to see if there's anything happening. If someone said something has happening, see if it's happened again, and try to work out what that was that happened. Now, if there's nothing happening, which is it's fine, but that's boring, isn't it? It's boring for television.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, to me, I mean, and I know a few people have used the analogy, it's very much like fishing.
Yeah.
You could be sat there all day, nothing. And then
Yeah.
you might get a bite just at the end. And I think it's very much the same. But I think what a lot of people forget is that when they look at, and you could go back again to Peter Underwood, back again to Andrew Green and Andrew Mackenzie and the others, when they're writing up or when they wrote up the accounts, when you look at what the witness was doing, none of them were looking for ghosts.
No.
They were doing something completely mundane. They were sat in bed reading. They were doing the dishes, looking out into the garden. And they've seen a figure walk past, or something's caught their eye, or they've heard a noise. I mean, the amount of people that have had a paranormal ghostly encounter when they sat on the toilet is quite a few. And I mean, but you can't get much more mundane than that. But those are the kinds of things that people were doing. They weren't sat up at 3 o'clock in the morning with an SLS Connect camera, calling out, recording to see if something, an anomalous voice has appeared on there. They were doing normal day-to-day things in the daytime.
Have you found many of these these sort of high-profile investigations have ever come up with anything that's anyone's taken particularly seriously, like SPR or something like that? I'm just interested. I've not really ever heard of anything that they're going. You see it in these. You see sometimes newspapers come online on Facebook and stuff like that. In some regional newspaper, local ghost hunters claim that they've got photographs of Queen Mary, doing something, and then they'll be and 3 weeks later they'll be in another paper saying they found thing, because obviously they're doing the PR, which is all reasonable. Good luck to them. But have you ever seen anything other than look at this blurry photo and it proves the afterlife is real?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I really struggle with when it comes to the media is how they portray the investigation groups in their pieces, because the amount of times that you hear the term, or see the term rather, group of ghost hunting experts, paranormal expert, paranormal
Yeah.
professional comes in,
Mm.
and they bestow these titles on these people. And I wonder what effect that has on them in terms of their mindset and their approach to investigations, because they've been bestowed this title of expert. Does that now present them as that, oh, I'm somebody of importance? And I've also got an issue with qualifications in the field as well, because there's a certain university in Florida where you can go and buy your PhD in parapsychology for $1,300. And
That's
there are
cheap.
people doing it, and they're putting doctor before their name.
Yeah.
And we've got one or two in this country who are doing it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's not illegal. It's profoundly immoral in my book, because they're not a medical doctor. That is an offence if you were saying you were a medical doctor and put doctor for your name.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what it's doing is it's creating an impression that this person is an expert or they can be trusted. But when you look at what they've done, and I've asked a couple of these people in America, oh, which university do you get your doctorate from? Can I read your thesis, please? And they go very quiet. They don't respond to my inquiries. And I've checked, the the Library of Congress, the British Library, no thesis under their names held. But yet they're still getting away with it. And to me, that's wrong. I just wish there was something they could do about it. But
You were saying about how the local newspapers, and because it is mostly local newspapers, because every now and then you only get the sort of the big papers or the tabloids do something every now and then if it's a really cool one, like literally like Jimmy Savile's ghost is doing something, or something that's of there. But then you do tend to see lots of little ghost hunting groups, which are all good, and I'm certainly not criticizing any of them, not many of them, that in their local newspaper they sometimes have a story. It's usually around about Halloween, and they're doing an investigation for charity, or they're just getting up to something, and it's all good and it's interesting, and I read it and I love it. But you'll have the other ones that go around the country doing their business, and they'll obviously put a press release in, or they'll ring in, or they'll email that paper saying we've found something. Now, if you're not particularly interested in this, there's a vocabulary that the general public use, like their Ghostbusters, which you're saying, because that's where people see it. Like, I don't hear it much anymore, but I remember when I first started Spooky Isles, and people would be going, do, who you're going to call and all that. People maybe don't do that anymore. Maybe we're getting too old. But, and I'm sure you probably still do it, but they use the word, such and such's own local Ghostbusters are going to investigate, and it's, and they use the same, the different words and stuff like that, and it just becomes almost like this could be that town, that could be that town, and I think it's the vocabulary. And I've tried to look through over the years, and obviously we have it now. Like, you never used to have the word paranormal in news articles. Now it's all paranormal. Before the 70s, maybe, you can't find the word paranormal in an English newspaper. Have you found differences like that over the last 20, 30 years that you've acknowledged yourself as a change in the way the public look at this?
definitely, there is definitely patterns have developed and started. One of the things I've been doing is what they call content analysis. So I've been looking at different forms of media texts, the TV shows, videos from YouTube, the books, the podcasts, and looking at the way that the media present the paranormal, or ghosts and hauntings. And one of the things I have been doing over the last couple of weeks is looking at episode 1 of each season of Ghost Adventures. So I'm nearly at the end of it, and a couple of odd ones in between as well. And I might need counselling after I finish it, by the way. It's only so much of Zach Bagans each day you can take.
I don't think I've ever watched. I've never watched it because I just don't really like that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I have to watch it.
Oh,
You
yeah, well,
know, pity me, please. So I sit down and seriously, I sit down, I watch it. I'm looking at what's emerging, what changes from season to season, and there is a progression. You know, there are certain words and terms which start to come out. You know, the malevolence, the demonic, the amount of times those words are used in each episode. You know, there is a marked difference. So there are certain things which feature regularly and have done since like season 1. There's always that horror glitchy edit or cut of like a hand or something in it that is in each season. But yeah, the Ghostbusters thing is definitely a mainstay since the 1980s, and I don't think we're going to lose that. I think that will always be, because
and to my
that's
mind, it's.
incredible.
I know you love it. You obviously went to America and
Yeah.
you went to the premiere of Afterlife, which must have been awesome, and it's a great movie. But I don't see why people connect that with investigations because they literally are shooting at ghosts. And as far as I know, I've never done that. Have you ever done that? Have you shot a
No,
ghost?
no, I
No,
don't think I have.
not
No,
yet.
I think I know. I've got a proton pack. That's a completely different story. But yeah, I mean, but it's interesting. I think Lloyd Auerbach in his Parapsychologist Handbook that he brought out, I think it was about 1986. You know, he mentions the term Ghostbusters a lot through that book. We're talking dozens and dozens of times, but it's deliberate. He used it, and I think it was a good tool to give people sort of like, well, you're a parapsychologist. That's what Venkman, Stantz, and Spengler were. What do you really do? And so I paid close attention to what he did in that book, and I've tried to use it in the research that I'm doing now. And what I do, and I tried not doing it, and then I tried doing it, and was basically, if I was visiting somewhere, I wear one of my Ghostbusters t-shirts, and the response I got that people would, oh, love the t-shirt. And it was an instant in. And I'd say, oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of the film. And then you get talking and they say, oh, what are you doing here? And I'd say, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, wow. So it was a great way of breaking the ice, getting to know people. And then they start wanting to know more about what you actually do. So it really does work. But I think the media will always use that now. And I think with the next film that's due out the end of this year, I think that it'll continue to be a part of culture. It's one of the most instantly recognizable logos in the world.
Mm.
So I think there will always be a linchpin for it. But I think as well with the horror genre, you know, they like see a Conjuring, anything that's involved Ed and Lorraine Warren, again, that's always going to feature. And of course, with the term demonologist, that's come to the fore. You know, people are no longer ghost hunters or paranormal investigators. Every team had a medium. Now every team has got its own demonologist.
I haven't heard that for a couple of years. I don't think I've heard the word demon. I mean, I hear it, but it was all about 6 or 7 years ago. That lots of demonologists about,
Mm,
and it's calmed down a little bit in recent years. I don't know if that's because of COVID, as in there was a point there that there was lots of demonologists about.
mm.
Maybe they just got bored with it and found something else, or I don't know. So,
Oh, they're
but
still there.
they're still there. They're just maybe they're not promoting themselves as much as they
Yeah,
used to. But so you see that as a change here in Britain or in America?
definitely in America. But it started here as well. We started to get them. I mean, Most Haunted decided when Fred Bat was
Yeah.
there, was the demonologist. It come to the fore, and I no doubt it will evolve. The media is always evolving. What's going to be the next thing to come through?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I think in recent times, and I think it's a good thing, has been Uncanny. I think Uncanny has made I just think it's the way to go now. I really do think the podcasts. I'm not talking about this, but I'm talking about like from an entertainment point of view and from an education point of view. I think you learn more from an Uncanny episode or from the Battersea Poltergeist or anything that Danny Robbins and co are doing than you will in one of those ones where you've got to watch them wander around a dark room with the green screen on and waiting for rocks to be thrown at them. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think you've hit on a point there. I mean, I've always loved radio. Before I joined the police, I did work in radio. I have the face for radio. And I was a radio presenter, but I maintained that when I was in the police as well. I ran community radio stations, and I've always loved the medium of radio. So to me, it's very accessible. But what has become very interesting is that Danny Robbins has produced a high quality radio program or podcast. But the byproduct of that is he's now become the go-to expert on the paranormal. So people are going to him because he's produced a radio program on it. But he's a journalist, he's a playwright. Why aren't they going to, and this is no criticism of Danny, because I really do like, I love the podcast. It's really well put together. But why aren't they going to the SPR? Why aren't they going to ASAP? Why aren't they going to the Ghost Club? Because they're going to somebody who's known because they have a media presence. And listening to the shows, what's interesting, he has a case, and then he brings usually two experts, and I use the term experts because that's what he refers them to. Yeah. But again, I've got questions about some of the people who've been used. And I know you've got the likes of Professor Chris French or Caroline Watt at Edinburgh, but there are one or two other people who are used as well that use the term the Masters of Parapsychology. Well, again, I've reached out, had no response from this person. Where did you get your Masters in Parapsychology? People are being put forward as experts, but we need to make sure that these people are experts in the area where they claim to be from. I mean, one of the big things that a lot of people cite is Hans Holzer.
Yes.
Now, there are questions about where, if he did have his doctorate, because I think Joe Nichol did a lot of digging. I know I've been looking at things. The school or the university he claimed to have got it from doesn't exist. So that raises all sorts of queries then about the legitimacy of it. You mustn't take away from the body of work that he did, because he did a lot. But was it hooked upon that I've got a doctorate, so therefore I'm a expert or professional?
I'd actually prefer someone who didn't claim to have any kind of educational background doing it, because then it's just an enthusiast and they're just as capable as any of us, really.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
If you feel that you need to get a fake doctorate or something like that, what are you up to? Why do you feel the need to do that?
Exactly. Yeah.
I would have thought yourself. Sorry, just before you go on, yourself having been a police officer for 18 years means that you know how to investigate things. That's as good as being a PhD, as far as I'm concerned, because you can talk to someone and work out whether they may be. I'm assuming you can. You can work out whether they may be lying or they've been distressed or whatever it might be, which you're not going to get through by sitting and doing a PhD.
I mean, it's no doubt whatsoever that job gave me a certain skill set, which has been incredibly beneficial to doing the PhD research. I mean, I'm not making any point that I'm perfect. Far from it. We're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes, but we have to make sure that there are checks and balances in place to make sure that I'm on the right lines. That's why I have two really good PhD supervisors. That's why they bring other people in to make sure that they're on the right track, that you're on the right track. You're getting this peer review. Yeah, you don't mind answering questions. Like yourself, you're asking me these questions. It's brilliant. That's what should go on. But you tend to find that there are investigators out there who don't like being questioned about their methods. Yeah. I went to one observation session when I was in America. I'm not going to say where it was, but I was asking them some questions like, so you're using your EMF meter. Can you tell me how it works? And I gave some answer, and I knew it wasn't right. So I pressed a little bit. I probed, and he really took offense at it. Yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I said, okay, fine, okay, we'll speak after the event then. And then after the event, his partner on the at the event said, so what did you think of tonight then? Because we had some amazing responses from the REM pod. We had loads of interaction. I said, really? Oh, yeah, we had loads. And I said, well, I was actually making notes the whole time. You asked 37 questions to the little bit of plastic box on the floor. There was only one audible response where it went off. So 1 in 37 is percentage-wise way below, what would be regarded as statistically interesting. Oh, so their perception of what they'd actually done, they thought it was a lot better than what it was, but they didn't like being questioned.
Were they a big group? What were they? Were they selling spots? What were they doing?
They are a group in this particular area where they have got quite a big following. And quite a healthy business as well as a result of it. And they put regular ghost hunting events that people pay $75 to $80 per person. I paid for it. After the end of it, I would have wanted a refund, but I'm never going to get it. But this is the kind of thing they're doing, and they're regularly selling between 15 and 20 places per night.
It's good going.
It's good going.
Yeah, and that's why they're not going to be. And that's, I mean, I would have thought if it's not always the case, because I don't want to put down people that make a living, and this is a good thing to be doing. But if they were doing it just as a group of friends, or even as a legitimate group like Ghost Club or something like that, they would hopefully want, if you ask them and they go, look, you're right, I probably don't understand how this thing works. I think I do, but I don't. And then try to find out about it rather than being, defensive and go, well, what are you trying to say? Questioning them, they should be going off and trying to find out more about it. And then next time they're even better at it.
Yeah, exactly. This is what you want. I mean, we're all after the same thing. We're all after more of a broader understanding about what is going on in that particular circumstance. I spent some time with a group about 18 months ago in the UK, and the one investigator was sat at the table in this pub with a K2 meter in front of them and asking questions of spirit. And occasionally the little lights would light up. So I asked this investigator to explain what was going on, because I was trying to understand how they interpreted what was happening. And the investigator says, oh, well, we know that spirit's talking to it, because when we ask a question, the lights light up. I said, well, tell me how this K2 works. And she sort of went rabbit in the headlights, because nobody had ever asked her this question before. I said, well, does the meter measure amplitude or frequency? Oh, I don't know, was the response. Okay, I said, well, you've told me earlier that you watched the Ouija Brothers and they've influenced why you've decided to use this piece of kit. Have you read any physics books to help you understand electromagnetic fields? And the response was, oh, I don't understand physics. So it sort of took me back to, when you are a professional in a job, if I was going to stop somebody for speeding, I'd have to make sure that I knew how to operate the speed camera. I'd been trained in it. It was an approved training course by an approved provider, that I knew how to interpret the data. I knew how to record it. I could present the evidence in court if necessary. And it was quite clear that this particular person had not gone through that kind of thought process about what they were doing. She'd seen it online and she'd just gone with it because they were doing it. So there's one example that definitely media has influenced this one particular person. Whether that applies to everybody else remains to be seen. But this is the state that some investigators are in. They're not.
I
not
think
doing
some
what
of
you.
it, I think some of it's more ignorance than malevolence. Like, as in, they just never thought about it because they're excited by it. They've seen it on television and they want to have a go. And hopefully, anyone watching this, and I think I'm going to go away and do it myself. I'm going to go and work out how these things work just for my own, just so I know how it works. Because, yes, I don't know much about physics, but that's not a reason for not learning something, the basic stuff. But I do think maybe there are some out there, and you were talking about some of these ones that are, and I've not met too many of them, but there are some there that you could almost think if they lived 120 years ago, they'd be the ones who would have cheesecloth coming out of their nose and calling themselves Madam Such and Such because they are, the modern day spiritualist scams. Do
Yeah,
you think
very
that's a
much
fair
so.
thing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we need to guard against that kind of thing from happening. This is why we're trying to do what we do to show people that if you do have an anomalous experience, there are people that you can come to, but you need to be wary of those whose intentions are not as honourable.
Therefore, I'm just thinking, like, how would you do that? Because SBR is never going to be a sexy organisation. I don't care what you say. It is really, really dry documents. I've been a member in the past, but it's just really boring. I'm sure some of their talks are all right. ASAP, much more accessible to people. Ghost Club, awesome, wonderful. They're but SPR, excellent organisation, but is never going to be as exciting as Zach Baggins running through saying there's a dragon demon coming to take your soul. Okay, could it be? How do we use these big shows and push them towards, because maybe some people don't really even want to know that. It's like I watch, you watch shows, a gardening show, but do I really want to know and do a horticulture, you know what I mean? It's some of it. I just want the excitement. Boom, that's it. But
Yeah,
how do we leverage off the popularity of these big fancy ones? There's one, I don't know if they're still doing. I'm sure they are. There's a YouTube channel which gets like 100 billion views or something like that, and all they seem to be doing is each night running through or walking through turn the lights off in a building, walking through, claim that oh, it's the Antichrist, the demons are coming to kill us, and then they get 50 million views. You can't compete against that as
no,
a trying to be serious as a PhD. But
no.
how do you leverage off that?
If I can answer that question, I think I might be rich.
Mm.
I just don't think you can. I think you will be constantly hitting your head against a wall, trying to get that across. I think the time is, we're trying to play catch up, and you're so far behind, you never will. I think one of the things that we can do though is to try and work with, um, you know, amateur groups, call them that if you wish. Don't be sort of the amateur professional to them and
No,
us.
but
And
yeah,
that's one of the criticisms I've had about of Uncanny is, are you team believer, team skeptic? It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're trying to bring people together, not split them up. And it's about trying to sort of bridge the gap. One of the things that was said to me, and I actually took it as a real compliment, was when I went to the Festival of the Unexplained, because they knew what I was doing. I was there for the research, and they knew I was from a university. And one of the people said, "Oh, you're really nice." And I was like, "Oh, gee, thanks." And they said, we sort of knew what you were. We thought you were going to be this particular kind of person, but you're not like that at all." And I said, "Well," I said, "No." I said, "I'm genuinely interested in what you're doing, and to get an understanding of it, about how we work together and achieve a mutual understanding." So I think that needs to be done. And I know that other people in the SPR have argued vociferously that we need to um, make the things more accessible. The use of language, the use of publications, the use of technology, YouTube videos. Put something out there that we can say, look, this is at a level. If you want to make that next step up to the next stage, come with us. Here it is. But I've spoken to investigators as well who've said that I didn't know this kind of stuff was going on. And it's because you can't access it like via Google, because they're academic documents.
mm.
They're behind a firewall. So it's trying to make things accessible. I don't think we sell ourselves as well as we could, certainly from the SPR perspective. I certainly agree with what you're saying about the Ghost Club and ASAP. It's a different format, it's a different audience, and I'm sure that there are things that, we can all work together on to try and improve the situation across the board. But I don't think we're never going to compete with, Zach Bagans and all the other TV shows, no matter how hard we try.
Do you see a time where it's going to be, things go up and down, like, things get popular and then they twiddle off. Like you look at Most Haunted, there was a point there that was, huge, bang, 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 and then it's sort of, it's still there and it's still doing well, and it's still, one of the leaders. Do you see a point where it's going to? Because I actually think reality, you've got a lot on Amazon. There's a few on the sort of I don't know if I never could tell if it's terrestrial, whatever it is, but there's some you see there every now and then that are okay. It's certainly not what it was though. It's not the same as it was say 15 years ago for the reality TV shows. There's more of it. I just don't think it's as high level. Do you think it'll die out the same way that ghost type stuff tends to die out every 20 odd years?
I think that's a really good question. I think what you tend to see is that reality TV is here to stay, and that's because it's cheap to make.
Yeah.
And as long as it's cheap to make, they'll continue churning it out by the bucket load. People have always had an interest in the paranormal, and I think it's how they adapt the paranormal theme to what's particularly prevalent at the moment. They seem to be, Zach Bagans and his Ghost Adventures. It's up to season 25 now, and you say Most Haunted is still going in a sort of a format, but there are other shows starting. Like we've had the 28 Days Haunted, and there's going to be, I think, another season of that. So Netflix have tried their hand at it, and I think that there's always going to be a thirst for the unknown because of the fact that now media is produced in such a different way to what it used to be. I can't see it going away. I just see it evolving.
I think like I was thinking, you were talking before about like Osborne's Book of Ghosts and all. Like in the 70s, there was so much ghost books. Like they pumped them out, didn't they? You sort of, we're not even talking about like the Eric Maples, all those type of things. There was tons of it, and
Mm.
come out. I don't think you get much now. There's the books that tend to come out are local type of books of Ghosts of Bournemouth or those type of ones. We've had the reality TV shows. Maybe we're in the birth of the podcast because I know following Uncanny's popularity, we often get contacted by different media companies wanting, can you tell us, and they're basically wanting us to do the research for their next, Uncanny. So
Yeah.
maybe that is because podcasts are huge now. Like, I mean, I think they must be making a fortune. Some of these ones where they're getting like millions of listeners. So maybe that's where it's going to.
I mean, you look at the cost. We like mentioned about reality TV being a cheap thing to produce in terms of TV standards. Radio is incredibly cheap. You can go out if you've got yourself a computer, a half decent microphone, which is a USB. You can plug it straight into the computer. You've got a camera on there. You can do a podcast now. You can sit in front of the computer and you can basically do your own radio show, even if you're not very competent at speaking or putting something together. And as long as you've got an audience with people who are willing to listen, it's easy to do. You can sit in front of the computer week after week and do something. Those who are really skilled at what they're doing, who do the research and whatever, can produce a really polished article, like Danny Robbins has done, like you're doing. You just produce this, well put together, well thought out series of structured questions, good program together, and people will watch. And the reason they're going after it is because it's cheap, and the market is there at the moment.
And they're seeing the ratings. So, that's not that I'm saying we're getting the ratings, but I'm saying these bigger ones that are on the BBC and other places where they have the things, they
Yeah.
obviously see it's there. So maybe, and it's a lot easier to do a radio show or something online like this than it would be to go and film something, because you've got to find the property to investigate. You've got to have half a dozen people to wander around, insurances, all the kind of stuff. So maybe that's where it's moving to. And I think it's like today I listened to a couple of podcasts. They weren't ghosty ones; they were just different things. And I listened to two of them when I was doing a walk. So they're very, very easy to do. Whereas I don't have to sit in front of a TV set. I can do it when I'm walking down the street. So,
Exactly.
so
And I
maybe
think
that's the future.
when it comes to, what you very well pointed out was the fact that they're coming to people and say, oh, can you do the research? Can you do this and that? I've had a few chats with Steve Parsons over it when we've been together, and the TV production companies don't want to pay
Oh
for
no.
them because they're too expensive. Like Steve Parsons says, and
Yeah.
quite rightly so. Well, how much are you going to pay me for doing this? It's work. But
Yeah.
there are always people willing in the background, back to wanting their 15 minutes of fame, who will do it for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And you're
Also,
never going to be.
the downside is I've spoken to a lot of people. Like I get a lot of phone calls, and half the time, you talk to them, whatever, and it never goes to anything. But a lot of them will take the research, and that'll be the last time you hear of it.
Yep.
And then there was one that was particularly aggrieved. That was a recent TV show, and he gave them quite a good original research thing. And then next thing he saw, it was on the television, and it was look what we've discovered, and he's out the door. So
Yes.
it's the ethics of some of these things. It's the Wild West out there. It's all it's what it is, and because there's money to be made. Whereas that's probably what's the difference in modern paranormal as opposed to something 40 years ago, which, yes, there was money because Hans Holzer was writing books, Peter Underwood was writing books, but it was only half a dozen people probably making a living out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I know that like Steve Parsons is very fascinated by Harry Price, and Harry Price was very media savvy.
Yeah.
And I think if Harry Price was around today, he'd have been on YouTube.
Yeah.
He'd have done it because he knew how to reach people. He knew how to play that. And there is an element that you have to be savvy. You have to be media savvy these days to be able to get your message out there. And if you're not, there are going to be people who are, and they will get in there before you.
It is the modern day freak show of some way, like you're just saying. Like Harry Price did his thing, but it's not much different to a P.T. Barnum type thing. Come and look at these weird things. Come and look at these amazing things. You'll be amazed when you see them or you don't see them. So that's
Very much so.
maybe
And of course, who did P.T. Barnum? Who did he enlist as part of his shows? The Fox sisters.
yeah. There you go. Yes.
So,
See,
he capitalized upon it.
yeah. So everyone has forever has loved, the media has always loved, because people have always loved the mysterious unknown. It's just nowadays it's more accessible to people because they watch a lot of it on TV, and all it really takes you. I mean, I was going to say all it takes is a pad and a pencil and a torch, but that's you as a little boy with your Peter Underwood thing. But now they go out there with their mobile phone, and that's really all they probably need. But
Yep.
it's been fabulous talking to you. We've spoken to you probably twice as long as we would talk to someone else, just because you've probably touched a nerve with me when it comes to some of these paranormal TV shows. I find them fascinating. I think some are harder to watch than others. I love Great British Ghosts with Michaela Strachan. I think that's a great show. I know it's not anymore, but I think that was great because all that was going and talking to people about what did you see. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, because it's literally, what did you see? And I've just asked you, Dylan, what have you seen? What have you thought? And that's what we try to do here on the Spooky Owls, is discover what people think and what they've seen. So what's coming up next for you?
Well, I'm back out to the States in March. I'm going to be spending some time out there doing some more research, some bits and pieces there. Got a couple of conventions out there to attend, speak at. So I got one
What are they
in.
like? What are the conventions like? Because I've been to things here, but I'm imagining in America it must be a bit more, a bit bigger
Depends which
and
one you
huger.
go to, actually. Two I went to last year was so well organised. There was one on the USS Salem in Quincy, just south of Boston, which was brilliant. And there was one called Con Carolinas in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they had some really good panels set up and really good questions. Public were fascinated by it. So I'm going to be doing those two again this year. So hoping for more of the same on that. They were more about not necessarily getting people who were on TV, though. They were more about getting people who were, local ghost hunters, or people who've got some background in it where they really felt could offer something a bit different. Um, so I'm looking forward to doing those. And then it's going to be, basically gathering the rest of the data from the UK and then starting to write it up. So hopefully I'd like to finish within about 18 months rather than 3 years if I can. Um, and I shall let you know when I reach my conclusions, because you'd be more than welcome to get me back and I
We're
can
gonna.
tell you.
I'm gonna get you back before then. I'm not waiting 18 months to talk to you again. I want to talk to. I'm sure we'll find some other things. Find out what that little boy with his Peter Underwood ghost thing got up to when he was at the castle, and I think that's the kind of stories we want to hear about. Some old school ghost hunting.
More than happy.
All right. Well, you have a great time, and we'll talk to you next time. So, thanks, and see you all later.